If you go to the curl GitHub and look through the closed merge requests, or at some point in the past you've made your own that happen to get merged, you're going to see a relatively odd, but still kind of common pattern. All of these merge requests we have here are marked as closed, but they're not really closed. Approved, closed with external commit. 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 Now, some of these also exist as a branch on the repo, just depends on who actually made the merge request, but the important part is this right here. Approved and closed with external commit. And maybe there'll be a comment saying thanks, or maybe a bit of discussion about some changes to make to the merge request, but this is the important part of the pattern, as opposed to how a lot of other projects do it. Here we have Polonium, but plenty of other projects use the exact same model, which is when a merge request is made, or in the case of GitHub, a pull request is made, it is merged through the interface on GitHub. And when it's done like that, you get this little bubble saying, it's merged, it's purple, hey look, that's cool. And you can also easily search through the GitHub UI to easily find things that are marked as merged. So what's the deal with this approach? Why not just do it the GitHub way? Like, why do it in this weird external fashion? Well, recently, Daniel Stenberg, the developer of curl, put out a blog post explaining why. Why curl closes PRs on GitHub. Now, just because this is the way it is mainly done, that doesn't mean it is always done like this. There are some exceptions to this rule, even just this year. Here is a merge that actually got merged through GitHub, but it's very few and far between, and most of the times things actually got merged were back in the earlier days of the project being on GitHub prior to 2015. Now, Daniel could certainly work around it and use a more traditional GitHub-style model, but Daniel blames the GitHub UI for forcing this model upon him. GitHub's UI does not allow us to review or comment on commit messages for pull requests. Therefore, it is hard to insist on contributors to provide the correct language, using the proper language in the correct format. What this is being compared to is the system where you can very easily comment on sections of code. So if you don't like what's being said here, if maybe this needs to change, maybe there's some explanation that needs to be done here, you can start a thread on any section of the code made in the pull request, on any of the commits made. It is very, very straightforward, and you can have these threads here to make sure that each of these get resolved before the merge is actually done. But when we're talking about the commits themselves, there's no way to say, okay, this specific commit, I don't like the way this is titled. Maybe change the name here. Maybe include a specific formatting we have. Maybe do some other thing that they want to have done to make sure that things actually line up with the way that their commits are supposed to be made. Now, you can just make a comment here being like, okay, this commit ID, maybe to go and change this one and make it to this title instead. But it is nowhere near as convenient as commenting just on the code. When your merge is just a single commit like this one, it's not that big of a deal. You could leave a comment about it, but there's no way to resolve a thread here, so we need to make sure that all of those actually get fixed before you go and do the merger. Also, there is another problem. If you make a pull request based on a single commit, the initial PR message is based on the commit message, but when follow-up fixes are done, and perhaps force pushed, the PR message is not updated accordingly with the commit message's status. So in this case, with fixed typos, the commit name is fixed typos. If the commit name here was changed, it wouldn't go and update this title. It's something the user would have to go and manually update themselves, or the repo developer would update themselves. Yes, you can go and do it, but it's annoying and you shouldn't have to do that. Now, curl is a massive project with a really long-running history, and when you have projects like that, you need to have a fixed style and syntax to make sure things actually stay in order. It makes the Git history better and easier to browse. It allows us to write tools and scripts around Git and the Git history, like how we, for example, generate release notes and project stat graphs based on Git log, basically. If you don't have a clear meaning for what is a change, what is a bug fix, you can't easily go and automate this process because you just don't know what in your Git history is actually going to be in that case. And yes, you can go and manually do it, but why manually do it when you can spend a little bit more time at the commit time and make sure that everything is clean and everything is very easily parsable? Now, if Daniel was the only person working on curl, you could do this pretty easily without having a style guide and syntax guide, but that's not what curl is anymore. It might have been like that in the early days, but nowadays you have people who may make just a single commit. Maybe they make a couple of commits and then go off and do their own thing. They're from another project that has a different style guide for making commit messages. Maybe that project doesn't even have a style guide for making commit messages. And you need to make sure that things actually remain clean in your repo, because otherwise, with all of these different developers from all of these different projects coming in, things are going to become completely unwieldy very, very quickly. It is a lot of extra work to go through this method and make sure all of the commit messages are good, but things like this then become very easy to do. So the way that GitHub keeps everything clean is with manual merges, as in merging the code outside of GitHub. In order to make sure the commit message is correct, and in fact, the entire commit looks correct, we merge pull requests manually. That means that we pull down the pull request into a local Git repository, clean up the commit message to adhere to project standards. So again, here is fixed typos. This is a fine commit, but in this commit here, which is the one that actually closed it, this also adds the misc tag. The misc tag is one of the tags they use to do all of this automatic parsing that we see over here. But how about closing this merge request with this commit? Well, the way that is done is with special tags in the commit. Fixes and then a number, and closes and then a number are instructions to GitHub, and we use them like this. Fixes means that this commit fixed an issue that was reported in the GitHub issue with that ID. When we push a commit with that instruction, GitHub closes that issue. Closes means that we merged a pull request with this ID. GitHub has no way for us to tell that we merged the pull request. This instruction makes GitHub close the corresponding pull request with committer close this in commit hash, as we can see with this tag here saying this was closed right here. Now, some of the other commits, like this one here, are going to use both fixes and closes. So in this case, this had an open issue, this one here, and it also had a merge request that also needed to be closed, this one here. But as you might have noticed, GitHub interprets these tags very, very differently. When fixes is used, it's not the same as just closing an issue. This is marked as the issue has been completed, but fixes doesn't work the same way on a merge request. If you use that on a merge request, it isn't going to say this has now been merged. So you have to use closed, but closed isn't the same as merging. So instead, we get the closed icon here. We do not let GitHub dictate how we do Git. We use Git and expect GitHub to reflect our activity. And that's the way it should be. GitHub should be a tool to facilitate Git usage, not a tool that forces Git to function in a weird and kind of obtuse way. And this is a big part of the reason that Linus Torvalds doesn't like GitHub. He found that a lot of the things they do with the UI kind of force it to work in a way that he never intended, and he feels like kind of just make it a worse tool. We could, in theory, fix and clean up the commits locally and manually exactly the way we do now, and then force push them to the remote branch, and then use the merge button on the GitHub site, and then it would appear as merged. However, that is clunky and annoying and time-consuming extra step that not only requires that we always push code to other people's branches, it also triggers a whole new round of CI jobs. This, only to get a purple blob instead of a red one, not worth it, because at the end of the day, that is the most important thing, right? The code is still getting merged, it just doesn't have the right color bubble. I guess if you're an Apple user, maybe that does kind of matter. Now, there is one other thing that having the bubble does account for. On GitHub, you can search through pull requests, based on the state they are in. So is merged, is opened, is closed, things like that. And because things are not being merged, you can't really use is merged properly. It's going to show you some commits that have actually been merged, but there's just not that many of them. But you still can kind of approximate that with the commit history itself, because all of these closes here, all of these fixes, are going to have backlinks to the thing they are fixing or the thing they are closing. So it's just a slightly different way to go about it, but the information is still kind of there. Now, if he could do it, he would hide the merge button so nobody has to see it and nobody has to be tempted to try and go and click it. But like many things on GitHub, that can't be disabled. But if you don't want to see it personally, it would be fairly easy to go and make a browser plugin that goes and hides it on your side. So if that's something you want, I guess spend a couple minutes learning how to write a browser plugin, or just ignore the fact the button's there. Like, that's probably a better solution. Or if GitHub wants to do some work, they could have a merged keyword that works the same way as fixed and closes. So when you use close, it closes. When you use fixed, it fixes. It marks as completed. And when you use merged, it merges. The other option is don't add a new keyword, make fixes also work on merge requests. Imagine that. Imagine multi-purposing a keyword you already have for a context where it also makes sense. What a crazy idea. Now, by not having ways to do merges through commits, this has caused a little bit of friction with things like Hacktoberfest, who won't consider pull requests that are closed with the close keyword as merged, which makes sense because if they did, then all of the merge requests that are just spare merge requests would get counted as merged, but these are actually getting merged. They're just not being merged through the GitHub way. Also, GitHub has these fancy badges that show up for various things you do on the platform. One of them is the Pull Shark badge. And the Pull Shark badge supposedly shows a 2x, 3x, 4x, etc. label on the little icon depending on the number of merge pull requests you've had registered in total. But if you've had thousands of pull requests merged manually with the closes keyword, they are not included in that count. So, doesn't matter how many merges you have on curl, it never would matter. Now, I don't really care about a little badge, but it probably matters a little bit more for an event like Hacktoberfest. And this is the best part. People have been requesting this feature since 2013, both marking as merged, also disabling the merge button. This is where people would go before GitHub had an official feedback repository. And now that they do, people are still asking for this feature to be available. And the curl project is even brought up as an example of why this would be a good feature. Now, in the comments of the blog post, someone asked a valid question. Sounds like the squash and merge button / option, which allows you to edit the commit message, would accomplish the same thing, except without leaving the interface, with less steps and friction. I would love to learn why this option does not work for this project. Perhaps I'm missing that from the article. Do you mind expanding why? And the first reason is part of why Linus Torvalds doesn't like GitHub. I dread editing a commit message and staying within the 72 column limit in a web form, especially if it's a large one. There is absolutely no reason that GitHub cannot make their web form actually work properly. They just don't want to do it though. But more importantly, a PR can certainly end up with more than a single commit. So just assuming that all commits would always be squashed is not the right thing. If there are separate changes, they should remain separate commits, each with its own correct commit message. Now, as I said earlier, and the fact that people have been asking about this since 2013, there are obviously other projects besides curl that make use of this feature. But now you know why curl does it, and maybe if you're making a project, maybe this is an idea that you'd want to do yourself. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down below. So if you liked the video, go like the video. And if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here. Check out the Patreon, subscribe, Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I'm going to curl up into a ball.